WTO and how the MFN clause, which all countries have to follow as WTO members, this we talked about last time, and there are certain exceptions to this rule, right? And the exceptions are, well, under what situations can you not follow this MFN rule, which is that all WTO member countries should offer the same tariffs to all the other member countries. Okay, so this tariff that they agree upon is referred to as the MFN tariff. Okay, and if I had to use a term which I think explains this clause well, is the fact that you should not have any favorites. There should be no favoritism among WTO members. Everyone should be treated equally. And the importance of this MF rule will become very clear to you once we do this exercise about welfare analysis. Okay, so what are the exceptions to this rule? We discussed this. One of them is your preferential trade agreements. Okay? Preferential trade agreements. So let's talk about the various forms of this agreement. Okay. Now, here I'm just going to draw a few circles which represent countries. Okay, country A, B, C, and D, or we can just think of this as US and Canada and Australia and Japan. Okay. Now, when a country signs a preferential trade agreement, there are different forms that it can adopt. Okay, the first one is that as per the MFN clause and the exception, which generally you see in the footnote of the trade agreement papers, is that the tariff among countries that sign the PTA, the tariff should be equal to zero. There should be free trade. So if you have to reduce the tariff, reduce it all the way and go for free trade. Under those circumstances, you can go against the MFN clause. Okay? Now, tariff equal to zero. So countries that sign the PTA, let's say in this case it is US and Australia. Yeah. So US and Australia sign the Preferential Trade Agreement. These two countries are referred to as the member countries, yeah? The member of the PTA that has been signed. Yeah. And the other countries which are WTO members, but they are not a part of this PTA. They are referred to as non-member countries. Okay. Now, we understand that, yeah, the non-member countries. So tariff within the member countries is reduced to zero. So US and Australia decide that they're going to charge a tariff equal to zero. They're going to have free trade with each other. So both US and Australia have removed all trade barriers as far as trade is concerned with each other. But US still has the same tariff. It can be the MFN tariff with the other non-member countries. Okay. Now, US also has issues with Canada. It charges a tariff for softwood lumber. Yeah? And so for Canada, it has MFN, and it has a dumping tariff, another tariff that it adds. Now that Australia is a part of the Preferential Trade Agreement with the US, does Australia also have to charge the same thing when it trades with Canada? That means, does Australia now have to follow the same trade policies with the rest of the world as the US does? And the answer is not necessarily. So in case where tariff between member countries are zero, but member countries can have their own trade policies with the rest of the world, or other, in that case, we refer to such preferential trade agreement as free trade area. Okay, so this is referred to as free trade area. Okay? A free trade agreement. Let me just call this agreement. Free trade agreement. Okay. Now, what if countries actually want to go ahead and be more integrated? And one way of doing that is saying, okay, fine, we form a free trade area, which means tariff equal to 0, plus we also have the same trade policy with the rest of the world. So we have a common trade policy with the rest of the world, or with the non-member countries, non-member to the preferential trade agreements. Okay, and those preferential trade agreements are referred to as, anyone? Custom unions. Okay. Now you can go and actually try to have even more of an integration between countries, and you can say, how about you actually have everything? You have tariff equal to 0, you have common trade policy, and you also allow for free movement of factors of production. So labor and capital can move freely, and capital can move freely across countries. That's much more integration across the member countries, right? Because it's basically saying that, hey, let's do custom union plus free movement of factors of production. Just one step further than custom unions. And these agreements are referred to as common market. Now you can get more integrated by having a common market. So everything that exists in the common market, plus you allow for to follow the same currency. Yeah, that would be the common currency. And do you guys have an example for that? Yes, we do. And in this case, the example is EU. Yeah. Now, right, guys, for our course, we are going to focus on the ones that are extremely important for trade, which is the free trade agreement. Yeah. Generally, the textbooks, when they are talking about the preferential trade agreements, these are the three. They focus on these three. Okay. And they might or might not mention the fourth one. This one exists as well, right? So here we have exception to the rule. MFN rule is, one exception is having a preferential trade agreements, and countries can be less integrated and have FTA, more integrated, have custom unions, or even go further and have common markets, right? And We understand how that works out as far as countries are concerned. If they are WTO members, all countries have to charge an MFN tariff, a tariff that has been agreed upon multilaterally by all the WTO members. All right, guys, any questions? There are lots of chats here, so let me have a look. And not all of the EU uses the same currency. That's right, Padma. A common currency here, okay, guys? Right. So now I'm going to ask you guys a question here. All right. So we're just going to see this in terms of a graph. Say we have this importing country, okay? And maybe I should use a it is an importing country, and it is trying to import coffee. And it has a few choices. It can either import this coffee from country A or country B or country C. Okay. If it purchases from country A, it pays $5. Country B charges $7. Country B charges $9. And why might that be? Well, it's because country A seems to have low cost of production for coffee. So it seems that country A has a comparative advantage. Yeah? So let's say all these countries are members of the WTO. Okay? And there is a tariff that they have agreed upon, all the WTO members, to be charged, and this is $3. Okay? This is the MFN tariff. It's a tariff that has been negotiated under the WTO, and it's equal to 3. Okay? So now, when you look at, let's say it's 5, and I'll tell you the reason why, because I want my graph to look nice. Okay? I don't want it to be messed up. So let's say the tariff is 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Let's say it's $5. Okay. So now, what are the prices from 3 countries? Well, it is 5 plus 3, 5 plus 5, $10 if you buy it from country A. It's $12 if you buy it from country B. And it is how much from country C? 14 if you buy it from country C. Okay. Okay. Now the question is, after the MFN tariff, because this is what exists in the real world right now, right? Where is this country, and we're going to call this country big D. Where is D going to import the good from? Okay. Now these are the prices that it faces, and it can get coffee the cheapest from country A, right? So as a result, the country that it purchases this from is country A, right? So as the world exists, which is before preferential trade agreements are signed, any preferential trade agreements are signed, it seems that D imports from E, right? This is an important one. And how much? What are the level of imports here, guys? Well, imports are equal to, if we were to look at it, A plus T, this is the amount that it is importing. Yeah? D1 plus 1. sorry, that is, so how much is it importing? Well, this is the amount that is being supplied at home. This is the demand. This is how much it's importing, right? So let's write that down. It is D1 on D1 minus S1. Or you can write this as S1 to D1. Yeah? Same thing. And this is before the Preferential Trade Agreement. Yeah? Now, what if this happens? This country decides that it's going to sign a preferential trade agreement, and it signs the preferential trade agreement with, country A. So D and A have signed a preferential trade agreement. In that case, D imports from what are the two prices that the country is now looking at? Well, the country is looking at, I'm just going to delete the ones that don't apply here, okay guys? So it is looking at these prices. It is looking at A plus T has been removed, tariffs have been removed from that country, and the A does not pay any tariffs, right? And so you have three prices that D is now considering are 12, 14, or 5. Of course, 5 is the lowest. So where is this country going to purchase coffee from? Still from A. Yeah. And what are the level of imports now? Well, it is importing, let's refer to this as S2 and D2. So the level of imports now are D2 minus S2. Right? So what do we see? Well, there is an increase in level of imports by how much? By this much. Okay. And this increase in trade is referred to as trade creation. S1 minus S2 plus D2 minus D1. Right? This is the case of a PTA with country A. So when we're talking about exceptions to the rules and so on, we're just saying that there is an MFN clause that everyone has to follow. If they charge a tariff other than the MFN tariff, it's a violation of the clause, and other countries can, and it is not allowed, right? But there are certain cases when you can violate that clause, or you can charge tariff other than the MFN tariff, and the exceptions, one of the exceptions to this rule of MFN clause is that countries can charge tariff other than the MFN tariff only if they bring down that tariff equal to 0. They move completely towards free trade, because that's the really main goal for the WTO, right? So that's what we mean by exception to the MFN clause. Yeah? The preferential trade agreements are signed, and they are allowed under the WTO as an exception to the MFN rule. Okay. So is that? Yeah. And when we refer to the non-member countries here, these are not referring to the WTO members. These are referring to non-member countries of PTA, Preferential Trade Agreement that has been signed. Okay, guys? Yeah. Not the WTO members. Okay. Members of the PTA or the FTA in this case. Yeah. Is that cool? All right. Now the other question that we want to ask is, what if the PTA is not signed with A, but the country signs a preferential trade agreement with the the country B. D signs a preferential trade agreement with country B. What would happen in that case, right? So we're doing PTA with B. The countries that are signing the agreements are D and B, right? Having a hard time writing today. Right. So let's move here. We can actually look at our graphs while we are working on this. So PTA with country B. So country D and B are now signing a preferential trade agreement. Yeah. And so going back to, I shouldn't have erased these. I got very happy and excited about this, and as a result, I was very quick at deleting it, right? So it was price equal to 5 from country A. From country B, it was price is equal to, what was it? 9? No, it was 5 to the 10, 11, 12, 7. And C was price is equal to 9. Yeah. And we had price A plus T, which was equal to 5 plus 5, 10. Yeah? So this was our graph. Yeah? This is with tariff of $5, which was the MFN tariff. Yeah? Right. The country signs a preferential trade agreement with country B. What does that mean? Well, that means that tariffs on goods from B have been reduced to 0, right? So that means country B, which is this one, does not have to pay tariff. Yeah. And so the country is now looking at these prices. It's looking at A is still paying a tariff. It's looking at A. It's looking at C plus T, and for B, there are no tariffs. So let me just, this is the, if it buys from C, there's a tariff, 14. If it buys from A, it pays $10. If it buys from B, it pays $7. So if it signs a PTA with B, where does it want to purchase this good from? I repeat, if it buys from A, there's still a tariff because there's no preferential trade agreement. If it buys from B, it's a PTA, there is no tariff being charged. This is the price. If it buys from C, it is imposing a tariff, so this is the price. So if a PTA is signed with B, it imports from country B. Country B. Yeah. All of it is now country B. How much does it import? Well, it imports this much and this much. Yeah. Makes sense? All right, so I'm going to again write that down as S2 and D2. Right. Okay, good. Now I have two questions for you. It imports from country B. What does it import from country B? Well, it imports D2 minus S2. Yeah? But can we divide these up into trade creation first? So yeah, sure. So the total amount that it is importing is, the total amount that it imports is D2 minus S2. Okay, just bear with me guys here. Okay. Now a part of this is new. There has been trade that has been created here, right? Trade creation. How much new trade? Well, it used to import D1 minus S1. Now it imports D2 minus S2. So in this case, it's D2 minus D1 plus S1 minus S2, that is now the amount that it is importing that it did not import before. Yes, guys? Yeah, so that's trade creation. And I am separating that from this other amount of imports, this much, this one, D1 minus S1. So what's so special about D1 minus S1? Well, D1 minus S1 initially used to come from which country? Country A. Yeah. After PTA, where is country D buying this good from? From country B. Right? From country B. Trade has been diverted. Imports have been diverted from A to B. That's what just happened. Yeah? And that we refer to as trade diversion. So how much is the trade diversion? Well, trade diversion is amount D1 minus S1, the amount that it used to import from A, now it imports from country B, right? Why is that a big deal? Well, it is a big deal because are you guys listening? It is a big deal because if we look at the other countries that are exporting coffee, country A can sell this good at price 5, country B 7, country C 9. Yeah. Under the MFN clause, this was country B's. Under the MFN clause, they had to charge the same tariffs to all the member countries, WTO countries. Yeah. You know that, right? Before tariffs, which country would they have imported from? From A, because A had the lowest price. A has a comparative advantage in the production of coffee, and A should be the exporting country. That way, in the world market, we're using our resources efficiently. If they follow the MFN rule, where would they import the coffee from? Still A. By having the same common tariffs for all WTO members, there is no change in comparative advantage, no change in trade from a country that has a comparative advantage. You'll still import the good from a country that has a comparative advantage, which is A, if you had the same tariffs. This ranking doesn't change if you have the same tariffs. But now, this country has signed a preferential trade agreement with country B. And as a result, it imports from country B. Country B's cost of production is 7. Yeah? It is a higher cost country compared to country A that D used to import from before. So trade diversion generally always seems to happen, yeah, away from low cost country, which was A in this case, to a higher cost country, in this case, which is B. Yeah. So whether a preferential trade agreement is beneficial for the world or not can be directly deduced from whether there is only trade creation, there's also trade diversion, and by comparing the two, creation and diversion. In the case when the PTA was signed, you guys see here, when the PTA was signed with a low-cost country, there was no trade diversion. There was only trade creation. In this case, PTA with B, there is also trade diversion. Second case. This country could have also signed a preferential trade agreement with country C, and that would be even worse for the world market. All right, guys. Any questions? Why would they sign with a PTA? Well, there can be many reasons, but political reasons would be one of them. Also, it is possible that this country wants to have access to, because they will have to and fro. So it is possible that they want to have an open market with B. There is maybe you sell sugar, and a B is a big consumer of sugar and imports sugar. So you want to have access to B's market, and you really support your sugar industry. So you want to sign a preferential trade agreement with this country B, even though it is not beneficial for the world market. It might still be beneficial for you as a country once you take into account that this importing country is also an exporting country. So that might be the reason why. But if you just look at the welfare analysis for country D, you realize that what we are really doing is, this is the same analysis that you've done before. We are actually now moving from a tariff, that is too big. We are moving from a positive tariff to a tariff of zero, no tariff for this country, right? Which is country D, when it signs the preferential trade agreement. So when you do the analysis, welfare analysis, it is the same analysis. For this PTA with B, you'll be looking at two prices. You'll be looking at price that they paid before it was A plus T, because that's where they imported from. After, this is the P price B, and you'll do the tariff analysis by looking at the changes in consumer surplus, producer surplus between these two prices. So for country as a whole, just looking at the importing sector, you'll realize that signing the preferential trade agreement with B and A would give different results. But once you account for the fact that once the PTA is signed, this D also has access to A and B's and C's domestic market as an exporter, and you'll realize that various reasons why they might want to sign a preferential trade agreement with B instead of A. So that was a long answer to your small question. Guys, all right. So the fact that they have a competitive advantage is generally not the only reason why they would want to trade. Now I'm going to share with you guys okay, first I have to stop sharing. All right. I'll just share the whole screen and just go to the modules, and we have PTAs and WTO for this week. And where we're going right now is we are looking at the regional trade agreements database that is available to us from WTO. Okay, this is the progression of these trading agreements. This is the number of FTAs that were in place in 1950. In force 6. So what has happened to financial trade agreements? Cumulative number of RTAs in force 306. notifications is for 488. What does notification means? It means that when countries sign or are planning a preferential trade agreement, are in discussion and have formed a preferential trade agreement, they have to notify the WTO of this agreement. Yeah. And it sometimes takes time for countries to actually officially inform the WTO. Yeah. And so that's what you have, notifications and cumulative. Now this is, we can choose a country and see how many preferential trade agreements it has. Yeah? But what this generally tells us is how many PTAs has a country signed? How many PTAs has country signed? So you have China here, which has preferential trade agreements with all these countries. Do you see that? All these dots. These are the PTAs that China has signed. If you look at United States, these are the PTAs, preferential trade agreements. If you look at Canada, these are all the preferential trade agreements that Canada has signed over time. Yeah. Right. Let's see Mexico. These are all the preferential trade agreements that Mexico has signed. Yeah. I want to now look at another country, Chile. Yeah. These are the preferential. Do you see how many PTAs Chile has? And this is Mexico. Yeah. Does Chile have preferential trade agreements with US and Canada? And the answer is yes. Yeah. And we see that these countries have fewer preferential trade agreements, and this is Pakistan, India, no PTAs with Canada or the US for India, yeah? Not with Australia either. All right, guys, so these are the regional trade agreements. This is over time what has happened, and we can look around and you see that RTAs in force and inactive. So some regional trade agreements might be for a couple of years and then it might be shelved. This is how many are in force right now by region. Yeah. And again, we can see over time what has happened. So let's look at over time North America, and the sharp increase is really happening in the 2000s, right? The sharp increase in RTAs. Anything you guys want me to click here or have a look at? People? I'm just going to play around with the World Trade on this site right now for the next 2 minutes, and then we'll call it a day. So the WTO has really fantastic statistics, okay? And we can look at how many members it has as well. And so let's look at the maps, membership. All right. So these are all WTO members. Yeah. And these are countries that are right now have asked to join WTO, and the negotiations are still going on. But you do see how many countries are already members of WTO, and you do not have to be a WTO member to trade with other countries. Okay. And when we click on this, it tells us when they joined the WTO. 1995 does not really mean anything because WTO was formed in 1995. So when you click on that, it would say 1995. So you'll have to see when they actually joined GATT, if they joined before 1995. So that would be the earliest. But let's look at China. China joined in 2001. Yeah? And 2015. So there are countries that have just recently joined. Australia is an old member of the WTO, and that's what we see here. Again, Brazil as well, 1995, and we have there's a country here that I want to look at, which is where did it go? Here, yes, 1995. So what I'm trying to show you guys is that you can have small countries which are generally smaller in trade, which joined much before China did. Yeah, so you can see that for various countries here. Yeah. All these were WTO members. And if you look at their trade with respect to, whenever I think of Botswana, I think of the books that I'm reading these days. Chad, Nigeria, any other country that you guys want me to? Egypt, 995. EU, formerly EC, 995, yeah. And the other countries would be 1996, a year after WTO came in, again, an old timer, 2012 later. So this is a fantastic way of looking at what is happening as far as membership is concerned for the WTO. Yeah. All right, guys, that's all for now. Any questions? All right, you guys had a question related to what the coverage for sorry, I got distracted by Ritesh's question, the point that he made here, that China does not seem to have much PTA with the West. I think one is that China has joined the WTO a little later as well. And it took China 2 or 3 years before it actually used the anti-dumping legislation. They're just getting their feet wet. And it is really a little difficult to actually understand how the old members had been using these anti-dumping and countervailing duties and signing preferential trade agreements, and they wanted to actually be more well versed in these policies before actually starting using it. So they didn't have the anti-dumping legislation in place when they joined the WTO, which means that they didn't really impose any anti-dumping, even if countries were dumping in their countries in their domestic markets. And I remember there, a few years back, I think it was 4 years back, there was a group from the Commerce Ministry from China that had come over to UBC, and I remember when I was giving them lectures on how Canada was using trade policies and these trade remedy measures and anti-dumping legislations. I asked them the same question: why they have been WTO members for such a long time? It had been a couple of years then, and they still have not used any legislations, anti-dumping tariffs against dumped imports. And their reasoning, their explanation was really that they wanted to test the waters before they start using all these exceptions to the rules that they have. Yeah, and after that, I just saw how China was becoming one of the biggest users of anti-dumping. Yeah, but prior to that, there wasn't much. So I would not be surprised if there is an increase or a rise in PTAs with China in the next few years. Yeah, Ritesh. Week, I would like you guys to start thinking about WTO, IMF, World Bank, what kind of roles they play. So if you come across any news items on these three organizations, just get extra attention to it, guys. All right, that's all for today. Hope you guys have a nice evening and take care.